You are listening to the Big Blue Marble Podcast with Anwar Knight.
And we have liftoff. Welcome aboard, my friends, to another edition of the Big Blue Marble Podcast. Indeed, I'm Anwar Knight, your host. It's a pleasure to have your company today. Good of you to join us wherever you may be watching us from around the world. We appreciate you taking your time and joining us on this podcast. I'm thinking we may actually be making history here today. Well, certainly on this front. This is the first time we've streamed live, not only audio, but video as we stream live on YouTube. So we appreciate the viewers, not only listeners, but the viewers from around the world joining us. A quick shout out to the kids, the Starlight families. I know some of them are joining us today from Starlight Children's Foundation. So thanks for your company. I also think this may be a first. Now, I don't want to assume anything here at this great zoo as we broadcast, stream live at the Toronto Zoo. But this is probably the first live podcast. I know you do a podcast, but streaming live, and my caveat is during a pandemic. That I know, I nailed that. I mean, without question, hence that's why we are certainly, doing our part. We're wearing masks for a couple of reasons, in fact. We're also going to be as far apart as we can from our guests. But this is quite an animal park, and we're going to go live to our gorilla cam in just a moment here. There's over 5,000 animals in this park, and more specifically in this pavilion, it's home to everything from chameleons to lemurs to pygmy hippos. And I think, who are you kidding? The big star, of course, is Charles. We're talking about the gorillas. Charles and his troop. This is where they call home, the African Rainforest Pavilion. So we have a gorilla cam set up, and we're going to welcome them out as we stream live here, because this is really all about them. This is World Gorilla Day, and the work that is done here at the zoo is paramount, not only on the level of work that they do, but how they engage the community at large and they help this species. So in here at the zoo, they have 8 gorillas in total. Of course, Charles, the silverback, is the leader. Josephine, Ngozi, Johari, Siddiqui, Nasser, Nanika, baby Charlie, who's just over 2 years of age. So are we going to live to the... Okay, we got it on there now. That's great. Oh my, there they are. Wow. So this is what it's about, you see? And this is their day, and it's celebrated annually on September the 24th, the same day that Diane Fossey established her Gorilla Research Center in Rwanda, Africa. So that was in 1967. Pioneer in primate study. In fact, it was her organization that became a catalyst that led to one of only a few major conservation success stories in the world, and we're talking about mountain gorillas. They were on the cusp of extinction, literally just a few hundred left, but because of the efforts, today they've been upgraded from critically endangered to endangered. Now, when I say that, we're only talking probably about 1,000 on the planet left, but that is a step up, right? We're aiming into the right direction, and it's important to note here, if you're not familiar, there are, in fact, 2 species of gorillas in the world, and extending from that 4 subspecies. So you have the western lowland gorilla, which Charles is. That species is critically endangered, but all of them are endangered. So you have endangered and critically endangered. It's not a good synopsis, but you're going to learn today on this podcast how you can help out, and you're going to be surprised how easy it is, at least to get involved into it. And as we look at the gorillas, I want to... welcome our first guest here, because, millions of people, come on in here, Dolph, millions of people explore the animal park over the years. They have come, and I'm willing to bet, now you'll be able to answer this question. Dolph de Jong is the CEO of the Toronto Zoo. By far, Charles is probably the big draw. Come on.
Yeah, there's
next to you, of course.
Of course, yeah. Charles has far more hair and some other things going for him. He's an iconic animal in our care. Been here literally since before the day the zoo opened. He's 48 years of age now, and continuing to be the head of this family group, and just an incredible individual animal.
Without question, and it's interesting because, let's face it, 98% of the world's population will never get a wild encounter. I know there's, a small group of the safari tours they do, very regulated, which is good. So very minute there. Then there might be some people that are actually into the efforts, but for the most part, virtually everybody on the planet will never get to be close to a gorilla, but they can at the zoos around the world, in particular this zoo, the largest in Canada. So I think that sort of sets the stage on the valuable role that the zoo plays, especially with a species like a gorilla.
Yeah, we play an incredible role as far as folks, at the best of times wouldn't be able to travel to get to Africa.
Sure.
And then add the layer of a pandemic on it, and you have a level of relevance that we never dreamed of. These animals are really, for all intents and purposes, figments of people's imagination.
Yeah.
They've seen them in a book or on TV or something, but when they actually get up close and personal, can see the size of a Charlie, the smell, see the interactions with the entire family group. It's a key thing we do in places like our zoo. Show people individual species, individual animals they bond with, but also the diversity of life on this planet, which, as you know, isn't trending the right way.
That's right.
The human impact, whether we're talking climate change and the related biodiversity loss, and then habitat loss for these big iconic species. They need big tracts of land. They need those core areas that are undisturbed. That's just not the kind of space that there's a lot left of on the planet. So,
and we're going to get into some of the big threats here, but I think that's the key, right? The fact that you can engage the public, because let's face it, at the end of the day, the public drives everything. It drives the businesses that may be impacting certain animals, certain parts of the world. But let's backtrack a little bit. Now, you said, so Charles, as I understood it, just as the zoo opened, that was 1974, right?
correct.
And Charles was here. And now he's still here. And I think for the average visitor, when you come to the zoo and you see Charles, we take for granted that the animals will just always be there. We don't understand, generally speaking, like humans, they get old, they get sick, and eventually they will die. So Charles is 48, did you say?
Yes.
Now, I'm not an expert, but that would probably put him in the senior category of gorillas.
Well, absolutely. Yeah, he is a grandfather, literally and figuratively. Although he did just become a dad again 2 years ago.
There's a lot of humans. Tony Randall did that too.
Yes, but for Charles, as he's gotten older, we've had to continue to change and evolve for him as well. And when you actually see our outdoor habitat in particular, over the past year, we had to do the equivalent of the bars in the shower and changing some of the steps as his age continues to climb. His mobility does shrink a little, so we're putting things in place so he can still thrive, be the head of this family, and play that role. So that care, so amazing, and our animal care staff are phenomenal that way.
Well, it's a testament just to the age, because I think the average age in the wild may be 35, 38 years, right? So already this is really amazing. But then, so Charles is geriatric, really, right?
Yeah, he's literally geriatric, and you're also in a scenario where, traditionally, a younger animal would probably have pushed him off. So he's in with this family group, and, things aren't exactly the same as they are in the wild in a zoo setting.
Sure.
But our team makes those changes, and we actually have a separate bachelor group and the rest of it, because, his son now actually is larger than he is.
Is that Siddiqui?
Yes.
So the son is bigger, and that would be a problem in itself, I would think.
Absolutely, and that quest for dominance is real.
Yeah.
So we put that in place, and he continues to be a great patriarch for this group, and really be one of those animals that is so iconic for our site, because people feel like they've grown up with Charles from that young gorilla stage to his geriatric state, watching his family grow and evolve, and really making deep personal connections with these individual animals while raising that awareness of the species. Because as you talked about, it's not getting better for them out there, and there's steps we can take that we want to try to connect people to here.
We're going to get to that in just a moment. I'm just curious, though, when a gorilla reaches that age, because one of the things that the zoos do, including the Toronto Zoo, especially when they have gorillas, it's about, of course, increasing the population. So I was looking at my records here, and I was trying to do some research. I think 16 baby apes is what Charles fathered, 11 of which have been born here at the zoo. Is he able still to father?
Well, he was a dad as of 2 years ago,
right, yeah.
And right now we have one breeding female in our group. Right. But we manage these groups in cooperation with accredited zoos across North America, and really, we're looking at this population with a global mindset. So we don't have a recommendation for breeding right now. So our female Ngozi is actually on birth control, and we do monitor the populations. And what we want to do is make sure we have that mix and we have that genetic diversity, because in a lot of ways, zoos are becoming more and more important as those genetic arcs when we think about limited wild populations and wanting to, in some cases, even reinforce the genetics of wild populations, not necessarily of gorillas at this point yet, but in other species where we're actively breeding, raising, and then releasing animals into the wild.
Well, and I think that is going to be, the testament. There will always be some controversy with zoos for some people. But if we lived in a perfect world where the harm to oh my goodness, endless species. I mean, there's every day species become extinct somewhere on the planet. So this is one way, a stopgap measure, and we can not only increase the science and the research, but it could be basically, that olive branch for survival for some species.
Well, absolutely. And one of the key things that we are forever talking about is how little we know about what's going on in nature. The systems, how things are connected, the arrogance that people often have towards our knowledge of the natural world, and we're losing it again so quickly that we need to be doing more research and more work to understand the interactions, how these species are connected, and we're going to talk a little bit about what gorillas do and their role in an ecosystem. Those linkages, a lot of those things we're still mapping out, and it's so important to do that work before we run out of these animals. Well, we can still take those steps.
Without question. Now, obviously, in case you're just joining us, so we're streaming live here at the Toronto Zoo, the largest zoo in Canada, for World Gorilla Day. This is about awareness. This is about engagement, and obviously, we're in challenging times, unprecedented territory here on so many levels. We're wearing masks not only for us, but there is a real risk, because I know you've taken safeguards for some of your animals, in particular for the gorillas. You have, in some sections, there's a vapor barrier up. You've also extended sort of the, how close they can get to the exhibit. So what does the science say? Is there anything more about COVID transmission to gorillas?
Yeah, we're really paying close attention to this. Particularly, we talked at the start about geriatric animals, and much like in human, those animals that are older or are immunocompromised are at the greatest risk. So we've really adopted the precautionary principle with our gorillas, with our felids, with our cats, the swine, the pigs, mustelids, weasels. These are all species where there is some precedence, particularly with cats in the Bronx Zoo, of COVID actually making the jump. And as all of us have experienced in the past months, we don't know what we don't know, and we see that policy and knowledge growing rapidly. And what we know is we can't turn the clock back. So we've been making choices from day one, whether it is this personal protective equipment, whether it's reducing access. One of the key things you do is just limit exposure, much like we do when we self-isolate, and take those other steps to make sure these animals are not at risk and are not going to have to deal with those challenges that we've felt so personally.
Yeah, and you mentioned the Bronx Zoo. I think it was lions and tigers. I believe also in Amsterdam it was a mink farm. It actually jumped over from the animal to the farmer and back and forth. And if you look back, even things like Ebola in Africa killed apparently thousands of gorillas. Now, the thing is here, if you look at all of those obstacles, I still think that's on the bottom of the list of what's threatening the species. And that's what I wanted to unravel. That's what World Gorilla Day is about as well. Let's talk a little bit about, what are the biggest threats to these animals, knowing that there's different species, but generally speaking.
Yeah, at the highest level, if we are going to affect positive change for a lot of animals in the wild, we need to be protecting their habitat. And that looks like a lot of different things, starting with real estate, them having those big spaces, those spaces not being fragmented, getting cut up by roads in particular. And then the issue that comes with those roads is the people getting in there. And, I talk a lot about conservation and saving the environment, but to deal with those issues, we have to deal with social issues. And in parts of the world, people are struggling to feed their family or struggling to make ends meet. So, there's times where gorillas are actually seen as a food source, bushmeat. And those types of challenges, are virtually impossible for a species to overcome. It's not a quickly reproducing species. So the pressure of population, being able to get to these animals, eating them, can really, poses a huge threat. So we're trying to raise that awareness.
And when you talk about, destroying the habitat, that in itself, so on one hand, you may have commercial enterprise who logging, what have you, but now you've made it easier for people, the village people or people in these areas to actually get into this very thick jungle. So that's another problem, right? Now we're getting it, and we had another podcast episode that we did when COVID first came out, talking about the spread of zoonotic diseases, and essentially it is that contact of wild and human. Normally, decades ago, there was always that buffer zone because science is telling us things like COVID, it may have existed in some mutated form for centuries, who knows, but in the wild. It's when you have that interaction with nature, humans putting it together, and that's when you start to get the real problems.
Yeah, well, this ties back to that really simple principle. If you want healthy populations, and they could be people, they could be gorillas, they could be tigers,
sure,
you need healthy ecosystems. And those degraded ecosystems, those compromised ecosystems that are under stress, that's where you start seeing organisms shedding viruses, and you start seeing the jump of those zoonotic diseases between animals, between people, back and forth. And those are things that we're not equipped to deal with. Literally, millions of years of evolution have us set up to deal with certain challenges. But when you see species that don't traditionally cross paths, animals and people who are traditionally isolated through geography or other features coming together, that's where the world gets scary for us. And really where our work raising awareness and getting people thinking about how they can save these little pieces, and it can be in their backyard through native species planting for pollinators and insects, to larger scale where we're actually protecting those big blocks, those parks for these animals to live in. We really need to take some significant steps so we have the real estate for these animals to live, and so those spaces have the biodiversity, so they're actually a little tougher and able to deal with the stressors that are coming in a world with a changing climate.
Without question, one of our mottos here is that we all need to be a part of the change that needs to happen, and it has to start now. And I think, if you've seen any documentaries, you've seen online videos, you come here and look at how gorillas react, most of the time it's a very serene scene. They're sitting in the wild because they are very shy and gentle creatures, and they're eating and they're foraging. But they actually play a vital role in the ecosystems that they live in, and I don't think a lot of people realize that.
Yeah, and it's interesting. We talk about wildlife literacy, and you can talk about individual species. And the first question, you ask people, what do gorillas eat? And often people look at their face, they look at their teeth, and they see these large canines, and they assume meat. Well, these animals eat a huge amount of veg, a lot of fruits, and literally they've been tracked to move up to about 70 different species of plants' seeds. And that's important because
they're scat, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So they're eating and it's coming out and it's distributing it.
So they're eating this, they're actually moving around in their range, they're actually leaving these scat piles, which are perfectly fertilized starting beds for these plants. And they're actually helping propagate those plants and get them started all through their habitat and their range. So, things that people don't think about as far as the role, a gorilla plays. They picture it, okay, it's a large animal that can pick large trees. It can actually do some damage as far as trees and breaking limbs. But that role, that subtle role, just like a bee moving pollen, a gorilla moving seeds, is a key piece of those functioning ecosystems.
And you mentioned teeth. I don't know if you could reach that. Your team was so kind and brought one. Can I take this out? It's not like an alarm going to go off. But this is a canine tooth. I don't know if I can. Oh, maybe it is taped. I don't know. Hang on. Oh, I can't open it. I don't know if you can see it on the camera, but it is very large. And you're right. We see some of those images and we think, listen, since 1930s, we vilified them through King Kong, right? We thought they are just, horrific. They will eat you. They'll attack you. But for the most part, if they're unprovoked, they just want to be left alone. They're very shy, very timid, and they have a wonderful social structure. We're going to get into that a little bit later on. But tell me a little bit about the zoo's role in the, it's called the Species Survival Plan. How does that work? What's the connection between the zoo proper and we have wild gorillas?
So, the Species Survival Plan is about making sure we have a viable genetic population. So, literally, there are these stud books and these teams that look at the animals in our care, look at who's related to who to make sure we're really keeping them mixed up and we're not getting inbreeding because those traits are incredibly problematic. And we're making sure we have a viable population in human care for literally, we're looking at a 100-year plus horizon. As far as these animals here helping their wild counterparts, folks see these animals and they start thinking, wow, gorillas, the other side of the planet, what can I do? And there's so much people can do. We have a phenomenal program here called Phone Apes, and people don't realize we talked about habitat loss. One of the key things, and it's a choice gorillas made without knowing, but they've decided to live where a mineral called coltan is very common. And these coltan mines are large, open pit mines, incredibly destructive, completely decimate the habitat and make it unsuitable for gorillas. Also bring in a lot of people in and other pressures that we talked about earlier, causing them to get pushed off. Well, coltan's in all our phones.
Yeah.
We're carrying it around all the
Yeah.
time. And the good news is it's actually really recyclable.
Right.
So, every one of us, by recycling our cell phones, by recycling our electronics,
Yeah.
we can actually play a role in reducing the demand for minerals like this and take a real step to help protect gorilla habitat. And there's a large banner actually right behind you
Right, yeah.
that shows this. So when folks are here, having that moment, connecting with these amazing individual animals, actually are giving a tool to go home and do something about
Right.
it. And we actually just completed a study. It's not released yet.
Cool.
But
So this is exclusive?
This is exclusive, and hopefully the Wildlife Conservancy folks won't be too angry with me. But the early results suggest
Right.
on issues such as phone apes,
Yeah.
folks who have visited the zoo, who have actually seen our gorillas, are having a higher likelihood to participate in programs and are aware of the program. So a real life example of how these animals are connecting to a conservation outcome to help their wild counterparts.
And it's such an easy thing to do. Like you said, I mean, almost everybody has it. And in fact, that in itself, that connection with coltan, the mineral, which you're right, I was doing some reading, 80% of the world's supply is around the Republic of Congo. So by having that phone in our pocket, we are in fact, sadly, part of the demise of the gorilla because we are utilizing that. So I mention that because one, you can certainly recycle your phone. You can come to the zoo and recycle, be part of that.
Please do.
But I think you can extend that. As I mentioned off the top, consumers can dictate. We can make our voice known that to all these companies that make the electronics that say we don't want to buy a mobile phone that has coltan from the Republic of Congo. So, it could be the same thing the way fair trade coffee, chocolate, all things like sustainable fisheries where the public has said enough is enough.
Yeah, and it's a huge call to action.
Yeah.
And every time we stick our hand in our pocket to now get our credit card out because we don't use cash much anymore.
That's true, yeah.
But when we make those choices, often there can be profound impacts on wildlife.
Mm-hmm.
And the coltan example is a straight line one. But your other examples, people make these choices that they think are innocuous.
Yeah.
Microplastics, you've probably talked about that
Yeah.
ad nauseum. These things that are just passing through our hands
That's right.
that then can have a profound impact on wildlife, not for minutes or days, but lifetimes
Yeah.
it can impact. So that's one of our key jobs here at our zoo, is making sure people leave with that connection between the species they're seeing,
Yeah.
gorillas, their choices they make, I'm buying my electronics,
Right.
okay, and then what I'm going to do with it. I'm not going to leave them in a drawer in my bedroom. I'm actually going to bring them to places like our zoo. There's boxes all over for them to recycle in, and they're actually playing an active part. And I think people want to play an active part.
I agree. I think it's about leading the path. And this is, it couldn't get any easier. It doesn't cost you anything because that, like you said, is likely going to sit in your drawer anyway. So that is the Phone Apes program. And how many phones, and I don't want to put you on the spot, do we know? I was reading something, it's over 20,000 phones over the few years?
Yeah,
It's got to be.
I was looking out to the.
I don't want to put you on the spot. I was just.
No, it's been amazing as far as the volume, and there's something about seeing, literally a garbage bag
Yes.
of cell phones. And again, from the image behind you, those
Yeah.
are all just the shells of the phones and a small sample of them.
Sure.
And this is part of being a conservation tourism organization,
Yeah.
being a great place to visit.
That's right.
Last year 1.2 million people came to the zoo,
Wow.
and they're not folks who have been often an active part of a lot of conservation programs. So these are steps they can take, and I think so important. And thank you for allowing us to tell this story as well, because again, people want to be
I
part
agree.
of the solution, and we need to give them the tools to help do that.
Well, I appreciate your time. I know you're very busy. We're going to have another guest in just a moment, but I think that's sort of the key of what we wanted to do on this podcast. We're at a breaking point, and we wanted to strip away the scientific jargon. Not that it's not valid, but there are tangible things that we can do each and every day that helps the planet, and then in the end, we all benefit. So, Dolph, I want to thank you for your time. You've been such a great host here. We're going to go live to our Gorilla Cam again as we get our next guest. Dolph DeYoung has been joining us, the CEO of the Toronto Zoo for World Gorilla Day. Thank you very much, Dolph. And as we look over again at our gorillas, and we'll bring our next guest in. And, this is interesting because you may not know some of the facts when it comes to some of the gorillas here. The fact that you probably don't know, they all have unique nose prints, just like human fingerprints. No two gorillas have the same nose print, so that's kind of fascinating. And some researchers use that actually to identify gorillas in the wild. And although gorilla hair looks soft, it's actually a lot more coarse than human hair. These are just things that I found fascinating. My next guest, you could probably do 2 hours of it in terms of these fascinating facts with gorillas. So joining me now is one of the wild care team that takes care of the gorillas. I know you do a lot of the animals here in the Rainforest Pavilion. Heidi Manicki Claffey is joining us, so thank you for your time today. And I got to ask you, you got a pretty good gig.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah.
You know, I can imagine when you go out, to some social circles, and so what do? Oh, I take care of likely the most iconic gorilla in the country.
Yeah.
That's pretty fascinating. What does that day look like, say for Charles, though? Tell us what time does he get up, and what does he have for breakfast? What is his day like?
Okay, so he gets up when we arrive, and throughout the year, the hours change. So he's in his bedroom area with the rest of the family, and generally they sort of wake up with the sun. They've got a big, huge window facing east. Sun comes up, and they're all sort of waking up. And then when we come in, they can hear us arriving, and first thing we do is we go and check on them and make sure everyone's okay.
Yeah.
And then we start with their diet prep, because with all gorillas, the biggest thing in their lives is food and eating. They love to eat. So our nutrition center, every day they pack us, boxes and boxes of food.
Yeah.
It gets delivered to the pavilion, and we have to divide it all into separate meals.
What is that food, though? Is it just
it's all
vegetables, fruits?
It's all vegetables.
All vegetables?
Yes, all vegetables. There's a tiny bit of fruit.
Right.
And we mainly use that for training, because they're on a new program. It's a bit of a Weight Watchers idea with a point system. So
you hear that, Charles? You're being watched.
Yes, he is. Yeah, as he's getting older and more sedentary.
Sure.
He's not losing the weight anymore. So, and he's not using as much energy during the day. So we have to always.
I sympathize.
Yes,
I get
know.
that.
I do too. And so we're always adjusting their diet. So we have to factor in growth, and we also have to factor in how much they're moving around.
Sure.
So so then while we're getting their breakfast ready, they're just waiting for us. But of course we have to do the boys first, because we have 2 bachelor boys.
Right.
And they're in the holding overnight. So typically we try and get them out into one of the 2 exhibits before we bring the family in. Sometimes we have to bring everyone in together.
Yeah.
But again, we have to keep a large enough gap between the family and the boys, so that there's no displaying going on between them.
So, Dolph mentioned that Siddiqui is actually weighs more than Charles.
Yes.
So now you have somewhat of a competition. So I imagine, so you can't keep them together anymore, correct?
No, we cannot.
They have to be separated, because in the nature it would be dominant. And would they fight?
Yes.
They would.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes. And you know what, Charles?
Even their own offspring.
Yes. And so if they were out in the wild, Charles would have just chased them out of the group.
Yeah.
But again, at this age, Charles would likely not be alive anymore in the wild. So if we were to put the 2 boys together,
It's something.
Yeah, because he's so much older.
Sure. Well, and truly, because in the wild they wouldn't even live that long.
Right.
Right.
And Siddiqui's at his prime right now. He's only several years, and then all of a sudden, so we're looking at Nasser here.
You get to see him in a whole other way.
Right.
Are there any unique personalities that stand out for you?
Yeah, we do have some very unique individuals in here. So, namely being Josephine and her daughter Jahari.
Okay.
And Josephine, she gives a lot of new people a hard time, and
As in people that are part of the team here, or even spectators?
Okay, so new gorilla keepers, most definitely, and Jahari does as well. Not so much the visitors,
Right.
But certainly some of the staff here. I know when PR shows up or marketing, I know they tend to get a little bit.
They know.
They know, and
know.
they start displaying at those people.
Right.
And so like those 2, they are very funny, and Ngozi, she likes to just hang out with the other gorillas, as does her daughter Nika. Charlie is loving.
That's the baby now, 2 years old. Right?
Yes, she
Charlie, okay.
loves interacting with us.
Interesting.
Yeah, and she loves interacting with human kids at the window. And
Now, do you find that any of the other gorillas become a little guarded with that because it seems like the baby is bonding with not part of the troop per se?
No, not at all.
No,
but
interesting.
It's interesting in the holding though, like when we bring them into a holding area to feed them.
Yeah.
And we separate them all because they're really not good at sharing their food with each other.
Okay. Well, in the wild, what you get is what you get.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So when they're in there and let's say somebody unfamiliar walks in, which doesn't happen right now during COVID, it's
Sure.
always just us gorilla keepers.
Right.
Charlie, she knows who is not a familiar face, and she will go running to her mother and cling onto her. And
So that's nature again.
Yes.
Everything would be great, but Mama has to be right there too.
Oh yes.
Yeah.
And even out on exhibit, quite often, like we'll be in the back and we'll know exactly what's happened. Ngozi will have gone out of eyesight of Charlie, and Charlie will let out the biggest scream you can imagine.
Wow.
And because she needs to know where her mom is at all times.
Well, it's interesting you say that because I wonder, how do they communicate? There must be some sort of calls of some sort.
Yeah, so they have about 15 different vocalizations.
Okay.
So Charles, for instance, he if there's danger lurking by, he'll let out...
assume danger.
Assume danger, yeah. So he'll let out a bit of an alarm call. I can't even do it because it's very deep in the throat, but it is loud.
I am going to ask you to do at least one so we get an idea.
No, I can't.
I would really
I
like
wish
to.
I could.
But is it something that you hear like almost like a chimpanzee, or is it
No.
a grunt, or is it just a scream?
You know what Siddiqui does? He likes to scream, but
Just-
I don't hear Charles screaming. He just lets out this. It almost comes in waves up his windpipe, and then
And they get it when he
and
does
they
that.
get it. So
Yeah.
they're all on alert. They're all looking like, oh, what's going on? What's
Right.
happened? What danger are we looking for? Some other
Interesting.
vocalizations. Every time they come in for a meal,
Yeah.
they start doing the low rumbling of, it's like
Is
and
that
they-
sort of a call that we're about to eat? Is that
yes,
isn't
like,
that something?
because they're just so sort of like you've got Thanksgiving dinner
Sure.
almost ready, and you've been waiting
smelling
for this
everything
meal,
in the air.
and you're just like and you make that sound. And
Isn't that something?
yeah, so they do that, and they
Yeah.
all have different pitches
Right.
of their vocalizations. So sometimes they all get going at the same time.
Now, does Charles? I'm assuming they will always. Charles gets first. There's never a challenge there, correct? Or would there be?
You know what? Yes and no. So when they're being fed the breakfast and dinner, they are. Okay, so
Somebody got.
You know what? I'll tell you right now what's just happened.
Okay.
So one of them is banged at the window
So
because.
we'll bring the gorilla cam up too, please, if we can.
So a lady has walked up to the window with
the
her
glass?
service dog.
Oh.
And so they are interacting with the dog right there. So that's why it's probably Charlie. Charlie is the one who's always fascinated. They all are.
Sure.
But Charlie always goes up to interact with the dogs.
I'm just fascinated. You could sit and watch the gorillas all day. And do you ever have a situation where Charles has to assert his authority, whether breaking up a quarrel amongst
Yes.
kids, or maybe he wants to sit in the special spot, and
Yeah.
does it take much?
No, it doesn't. Like, he just has to do his coughing at them,
Right.
and they know he means business. So he does try to assert himself out here, like especially when we open the doors and we let them out,
Sure.
and there's always food waiting for them. Well, Charles has become so geriatric now that they're starting to take advantage of him.
They know that Grandpa can't get up too quickly.
Right. So we always let Josephine and Jahari out first because Josephine, she's actually older than Charles. She's 49.
Yeah.
And she's so low ranking in the group that if we let her out last, she would never get anything. So
Right.
her and her daughter go out first. Then we let the rest of them out. And Nika will run past Charles. Sometimes if he can catch her, he'll
Yeah.
pin her down and tell her off. But half the time she'll squeeze by him
Right.
and take off running. And we always put a bowl out, especially for him.
Right.
But she will run to that bowl.
Challenging it all the time.
And she will grab as much as she can before he comes up that hill. But he's coughing at her the whole time,
Saying,
letting
"Leave it,
her
leave it,
know,
leave it."
get out of my food.
Wow.
Yeah.
We're streaming live here at the Toronto Zoo. It's World Gorilla Day. Fascinating stuff here. And it's interesting to hear the perspective that although Charles, from a visitor standpoint, is the leader and is so fierce. But there's a reality that Charles is also aging. But I want to give you a comparison here, an idea how big Charles. I thought they were going to throw something at us. Look at the size. This is a handprint of Charles, so it's a mold. I'll put my hand in. And now I don't have big hands anyway, but look at this. I mean, that is remarkable. So this is a casting from Charles. And then this is the foot. I'm not sure if this one is from Charles or not, but
Yeah, I'm not sure about
But
the
that's-
foot, but that's what his foot would look like.
you know. And then over here, this is the skull. Now, a skull of, would we know the age of that gorilla roughly?
No,
Okay.
I'm not sure.
But it gives you an
But
idea.
it is a male gorilla.
It is a male gorilla, and you
Yeah.
can see the teeth. Really amazing stuff. And these are some of the engagement things that the team does here at the zoo about educating people. I mean, this alone is just very cool. Like, that is
Yeah.
that is remarkable. Now, I have to ask you, is there, so did you want to say something?
No, I was going to say, you can see the sagittal crest here, which our heads are nice and round.
Right.
They have this to attach their jaw muscles to, because their jaws have to be so powerful
Right.
when they're eating all that very fibrous vegetation.
Yeah.
And also with the males, when they do fight with each other, and they have the huge canines, that's how they defend themselves.
Makes sense. Out in the wild,
Yeah.
that's what they have to do.
Yep.
Is there an example of, I mean, I'm sure there's many over the years, but about their intelligence that just makes you go, wow.
Yeah, there's been quite a few.
Yeah.
Our smartest gorilla is Josephine,
Okay.
our 49-year-old gorilla. Oh, so many times she
Yeah.
has managed to get a hold of things that she is not supposed to. Nothing that's harmful to her,
Sure,
but
but she finds a way.
she finds a way. So she's a really good tool user.
Yeah.
I had an instance of a male gorilla, one of Charles's sons, who wanted to look at a dog who was walking away, and the dog was outside, and this was winter.
Yeah.
And Sabira was inside, but he had access to outside, but he knew there was all that snow on the ground, and it was a bit of that crunchy,
Yeah,
hard.
yeah.
So he grabbed wood wool, and he wrapped his toes around it, and he used them as shoes
Is that not
to
something?
walk across this
'Cause it was too
crunchy
cold?
snow.
Isn't that
It was
something?
too cold, but he wanted to see this dog as it was walking away.
I tell you.
Yeah, so there's been quite a few instances of
Incredible.
yeah.
Incredible stuff. And I know there has been documentation too. I think it was in 2005 in the wild that they used a measuring stick to see how deep, a little moat was of some sort.
Right, 'cause
Because
they
they don't
can't-
like water, right?
well, they can't
They
swim.
can't swim.
Yeah.
So that's just amazing. We're just about going to wrap up here, and I want to ask you two more questions.
Mm-hmm.
One, how do you separate yourself? You get to see a perspective of these amazing animals unlike anybody else. We can see it as a visitor, and we can say, "Oh, it's amazing." But you're taking care of them as a baby. You're caring for them when they are ill or they're injured. You're also seeing when they're happy. Is it hard to separate yourself that you are caring for an animal that, hopefully not, but may one day no longer exist on the planet? Is that hard?
It is hard. Yeah, and that's why we're constantly trying to educate the public as to
Right.
what's happening to them out in the wild, and we need to step it up
Sure.
and help these gorillas, because there really are not a lot left on this
Yeah.
planet, and if we keep on going the way we're going,
Yeah.
the only place you will see them are zoos, and
Yeah.
that would be a real shame. We really need to help them out
We
in the
really do,
wild.
and it is easy to do. And if I were to ask you one final question, you've been here for over 20 years, my understanding, right?
35 years.
35
Yeah.
years. My goodness. What's the one thing that humans could learn from gorillas, do you think?
Oh,
All the
boy.
times you spend with them. I mean, they're wonderful at their family structure. They seem very patient overall. Is there one thing you think we could all just, take a page from their book of life?
Yeah, gorillas are very in tune with nature and their surroundings, and they're so good at surviving out in the wild without any tools, any gadgets, anything. They just rely on themselves to survive, and we've gone so far away from that. We think we're so superior
Yeah.
to gorillas because, we are intelligent. We are, building rocket ships and computers and
Yeah.
all that sort of stuff, but if you were to throw humans out in the rainforest, you're not going to survive very long
Yeah.
without any equipment.
They're very
So
resilient. They use
they're
those
very,
rings.
very resilient. So, we have to appreciate them for that. And basically, we just need to leave them alone in the wild. Like, that's their home, that's their habitat.
Right.
And, let them be.
Yeah.
And
And everybody should get engaged to do their part.
Yes, most definitely.
This has been terrific. I want to thank you so much for your time. And, on behalf of all the visitors that come here and our viewers that are watching, we want to thank you and your team for the amazing work you do, not just for gorillas on World Gorilla Day, but just in general, and also being such great hosts. So we really appreciate that.
Well, thank you for coming out today and
That's
highlighting
awesome.
World Gorilla Day.
Yes, indeed. World Gorilla Day live on the Big Blue Marble podcast. By the way, I'm going to post in today's show notes, where you can drop the phones off as well if you want to support some other networks, the Diane Fossey Gorilla Fund, the Great Ape Alliance. We'll put that in the show notes. Let's bring up the Gorilla Cam one more time, and we'll show you this wonderful troop, this family here at the Toronto Zoo. If you haven't come down here in a while, make sure you do, because it really is such a great distraction of what's going on in our lives. And be sure to say hi to Charles, Josephine, and Ngozi, Johari, Siddiqui, Nasser, Nanika, and of course, baby Charlie. They will not let you down. They'll leave you with a smile on your face. Just as we wrap up, I want to let you know the Big Blue Marble newsletter will be sent out on Monday. Feature stories, the wildfires. 5 of the 6 largest California wildfires in history started in the past 6 weeks. Unprecedented events going on there, and also the most dangerous ones. More people have died in these fires in 2020 than ever before. So we're going to be following that among some other stories. The newsletter, of course, is free. It's sent to your inbox each month, and we now have readers around the world, so we welcome you to do that. You can subscribe on our website at www.bigbluemarble.earth. Also, be sure to subscribe to the podcast, and now on YouTube. We're going to be doing that regularly. But the most important thing I ask is that you share. Share this show. Let's all get on board together. As I mentioned, let's all be a part of the change that needs to happen. My thanks to Jason Perrier for doing technical production here, and a big thanks to everybody at the Toronto Zoo. That's all for now. I'm Anwar Knight, wishing you a great day on the Big Blue Marble. See ya.
That was another great show, Daddy.
That was great. Yay!